Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're trying to convert it centimeters to inches down here. Administrator Jackson, again, thank you for being here. Are you familiar with the report that one of your employees, Dr. Alan Carlin, issued on the endangerment finding at the EPA?
I'm familiar with the work and his desire to have that put into the record. Yes.
Okay. Did you read his report or a summary of his report?
I read some summaries of his report and ensured that my staff considered it as part of the comments on the...
So you're aware that at least one person at the EPA is scathing in the concerns about what at that time was a proposed endangerment finding. One of his concerns was that EPA didn't do any independent analysis of some of these studies that were used to justify the endangerment finding. Why not? Why didn't the EPA try to verify some of this information that the finding is based upon?
The majority of our work at EPA is done by looking at, I'm sorry, let me start again. The endangerment finding work primarily relied on peer-reviewed. Our standard was that we wanted to look at peer-reviewed work, and we had, in addition to external peer reviewers, a federal team of reviewers who were reviewing our work.
Some of the material apparently used were press releases. Is it standard operating procedure for the EPA to issue major findings based on a press release?
I believe what you're referring to, Mr. Barton, is that subsequent, we've come to find out that there have been some allegations made that there were press release information in studies. What we did was whenever someone raised any questions about either the IPCC data or any of the underlying data, I made it clear to my staff that we had an obligation to investigate whether or not it changed the basis of the finding.
I'm sure you're aware that there are emails between Dr. Carlin and his superior in which Dr. Carlin is asking his study be considered, and one of the email responses is, "You don't understand, the White House has already made its decision, stop working on this report." Are you aware of that email?
Yes, sir. We discussed that, remember, a while ago on a phone call. We talked about that.
So what's your response? It certainly, he was of the opinion that the conclusion had already been made, that there really wasn't any real effort to do an analysis of the endangerment finding. And you've admitted that you didn't do any, or your agency didn't do any independent studies, that you took at face value the material that was basically put out by the advocates for man-made greenhouse gases causing climate change.
No, sir, I don't agree with that assertion. The agency's endangerment finding is based on thoroughly reviewed material by a number of scientific organizations. Mr. Carlin's and the email chain, as we discussed, I don't know why his supervisor wrote what he wrote. He has been counseled. I did not personally do it.
He's been counseled not to tell the truth. He's been counseled to keep his mouth shut. What's he been counseled to do?
He's been counseled not to make assertions that aren't factual. The endangerment finding that was begun under the Bush administration, this was years and years of work inside the agency, and Dr. Carlin's advocacy extended back into those days as well. The fact that he had an opinion should not have been shut down because someone asserted that the White House wanted
Dr. Carlin's opinion was that the EPA should actually do what it's supposed to do, which is try to independently evaluate, which has not happened. Now, you mentioned in response to a question from Chairman Markey that one of the reasons that the endangerment finding was put forward was because of a rise in sea level. Do you know what the sea level rise has been in the last 100 years in the United States?
I'm sure you have it, sir. So
I do.
Happy to hear.
You want to make a guess?
I don't see a reason to guess if
All
you
right,
have
it's
it.
20 centimeters. 20 centimeters. Do you know what the EPA estimates the reduction in sea level rise is going to be in the next 90 years because of your tailpipe standard that you've been talking about with Mr. Waxman and Mr. Markey? Do you have any idea what?
I've actually never thought of it in terms of a reduction of sea level rise. We talk about it in terms of
one of the reasons you issued the
greenhouse gas
endangerment
emissions.
finding was because of rise in sea level. Well, according to your own EPA scientists, this tailpipe standard that y'all talked about is going to reduce the sea level rise over the next 90 years between 600ths to 1400ths of a centimeter. Now, how in the world can sea level rise be used as an excuse for an endangerment to public health?
I'm afraid that...
I'm just going on what you said, Madam Administrator.
Yes, but what we did in the rule that you're referring to is come out with a rule that reduces our dependence on oil, that says we can drive cars that are more fuel efficient and that put out less greenhouse gas pollution. That's what the law requires.
My time has expired. Mr. Markey is being very, very gracious. Let me ask one more question, Mr. Chairman. If, in fact, the endangerment finding is shown to be flawed and is thrown out, is it not true that you cannot regulate CO2 under the Clean Air Act if you don't have the endangerment finding to give you the authority to do so?
There are a lot of knots in there, so let me make sure I understand the question.
Okay.
If the endangerment finding is thrown out or in some way nullified, then the basis for the automobile rule
No, ma'am.
is gone?
The endangerment finding to regulate CO2 as a pollutant is the EPA does not have the authority unless you have an endangerment finding giving you that authority.
Right. The endangerment finding is not a regulation, but it is the basis for regulation of automobiles.
Yes, ma'am. And if we don't have the endangerment finding, not you, but the EPA does not have the authority to regulate CO2 as a pollutant. Do you agree with that?
Right. If we don't have the endangerment finding, we lose the clean car rule, so it's gone. We lose any authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from motor vehicles.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.